Somewhere in the Middle East, a city of 40,000 people disappeared in a single afternoon. Not a war, not a plague. The government just decided it was time to go. And they went. The Middle East is not the desert wasteland the postcards sell you. It is layered. Thousands of years of civilization stacked on top of each other like geological strata. Empires rose here. Religions were born here. And whole cities, towns, villages, they died here too. Abandoned not because of bombs, not because of earthquakes, but for reasons that are somehow stranger. Oil ran dry. A king made a decision from a palace 3,000 miles away. A dam filled up. A plague moved through and nobody came back. A government decided quietly that certain people in certain places simply needed to not exist anymore. These are 10 of the most haunting, most forgotten, most genuinely disturbing ghost towns in the Middle East. Some of them are still standing, some are half swallowed by sand, and one of them is underwater, right now, with the rooftops still visible when the water runs low. And here's the part that should bother you. Most of these places don't have names anymore, not on the maps that matter. Let's go. 10 al-Qusayr, Egypt. Before Cairo was a city, before the pyramids were a tourist attraction, before Egypt meant what it means today, there was a port called Myos Hormos. The ancient Greeks used it. Then the Romans came and called it Qusayr al-Qadim. And for roughly 800 years, it was one of the most important trading hubs on the planet. Spices from India, silk from China, frankincense, ivory, live animals for the arenas of Rome. It all moved through this little town on the Red Sea coast. Then the trade routes shifted, and the town just stopped. The people left so completely that it took archaeologists until the 20th century to even confirm where it had been. What they found when they dug was extraordinary. Roman coins, Byzantine pottery, papyrus letters, actual letters written by actual people complaining about delayed shipments and corrupt officials and the price of food. 2,000-year-old problems that feel completely modern. Think about that for a second. The oldest complaint letter from this port is about a late delivery. Nothing has changed. Everything has changed. The port is gone. The medieval Islamic city of Qusayr al-Qadim, built directly on top of the Roman ruins. Then that was abandoned too. Then an Ottoman fortress was built nearby, and that fell into disrepair. And now you have this stacked archaeological wedding cake of abandonment sitting in the Egyptian heat. Every civilization that touched this place decided eventually that it wasn't worth the effort. Make of that what you will. 9 Hasankeyf, Turkey. Hasankeyf had been continuously inhabited for 12,000 years. Let that number sit for a second. 12,000 years. That's older than writing. Older than the wheel. People were living in Hasankeyf when most of humanity was still figuring out agriculture. In 2020, the Turkish government finished the Ilisu Dam. The reservoir rose, and Hasankeyf drowned. Deliberately. Knowingly. With full awareness of what was being destroyed. 50,000 caves carved into the limestone cliffs. Homes, churches, mosques, storerooms, a 15th century bridge that had survived Mongol invasions, Ottoman conquest, 2 world wars, Roman fortifications, Byzantine churches, Islamic mausoleums, a history so dense that UNESCO had repeatedly called the area irreplaceable. The government moved about 3,000 residents to a new town built nearby. They called it New Hasankeyf. They even relocated a few of the most significant monuments before the water rose, craned them out stone by stone, and reassembled them on higher ground, like moving a cemetery before a highway goes through. But 12,000 years of continuous human habitation? You can't move that. You can't crate it up and reassemble it somewhere else. 12,000 years. The dam has been full for 5 years. Do the math on what was traded away. When the water levels drop in dry years, and they do drop, the ruins emerge from the reservoir like a hallucination. Rooftops, arches, the skeletal remains of minarets. A whole civilization skeleton. visible for a few weeks, then submerged again. Hasankeyf still exists. It just exists underwater now, and the government considers that progress. 8 Al-Zubarah, Qatar. Qatar today is the country of Doha's glass skyline and World Cup stadiums and sovereign wealth funds so large they make European banks nervous. It is relentlessly modern in a way that feels almost aggressive, which is why Al-Zubarah is so strange to think about. In the 1700s, Al-Zubarah was one of the most important pearl diving and trading cities in the entire Gulf. A walled town of roughly 10,000 people, a fort, a mosque, a port busy enough to draw merchants from across the Arab world, Persia, and British India. It was by every measure a prosperous and thriving city. Then in 1895, the ruler of Bahrain, who claimed sovereignty over the town, attacked it. His forces razed it, the residents fled, and Al-Zubarah was simply over. One afternoon, one ruler's decision, a thriving city of 10,000 people, gone. Not a plague, not a famine. A political argument settled with fire. The ruins sat in the desert for over a century. Sand filled the streets. The walls crumbled. The fort, somehow, survived, standing alone in the emptiness like a man who refused to admit the party was over. UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site in 2013. Archaeologists have been excavating ever since, and what they're finding is remarkable. An exceptionally well-preserved urban layout, trade goods from China and India and East Africa, evidence of a cosmopolitan city that simply ceased to be because someone with an army made a decision. Qatar is worth $300 billion. The city that predates it by 2 centuries sits in the desert, fenced off, slowly being excavated by foreigners. The pearl divers didn't get a World Cup. They got a heritage site nobody visits. 7 Kharab Sayyar, Syria. Northern Syria, specifically the limestone massif region, is full of dead cities. Not metaphorically dead. Literally, 500 abandoned Byzantine settlements from roughly the 4th through 7th centuries sitting in various states of preservation in the Syrian countryside. They're called the Dead Cities. UNESCO listed them. Archaeologists love them, and Kharab Sayyar is among the most remote and least visited of all of them. What makes Kharab Sayyar different is that it isn't in ruins in the traditional sense. The walls still stand to several meters. The houses still have their door frames. The church still has its carved lintels. It looks less like a ruin and more like a town where everyone simultaneously decided to leave and lock the door behind them. The working theory for most dead cities is that they were abandoned after the Arab conquest of Syria in the 7th century. A combination of plague, shifting trade routes, political instability, and the simple fact that the Byzantine agricultural model that made these upland villages viable simply stopped being viable. But Kharab Sayyar's specific story is murkier. It's harder to date. The abandonment timeline is less clear, and with Syria's ongoing conflict having effectively closed off archaeological access for over a decade, it may be a long time before anyone pieces together exactly what happened here, which adds a layer of strangeness to it. A city that was already a mystery, sitting in a country that has been generating new mysteries faster than anyone can record them. Some of these places are abandoned twice over. Once by their original inhabitants, once by the modern world's ability to care about them. 6 Saar, Bahrain. Bahrain is a small island country. Manama, the capital, is surrounded by suburban sprawl, the kind of standard-issue Gulf development of roundabouts and shopping malls and apartment blocks that all look the same. And directly underneath a modern residential neighborhood in the suburb of Saar, there is a Bronze Age town that was occupied from approximately 2300 to 1800 BC, 4,000 years old, sitting under someone's driveway. Saar was part of the ancient Dilmun civilization, a culture mentioned in Sumerian texts as a kind of paradise or trading hub, a place of mythological significance in early Mesopotamian cosmology. Dilmun appears in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was in the ancient world a place people believed in the way later cultures believed in Eden. The excavated site at Saar includes a temple, residential houses, a well, a marketplace. The layout is meticulous, organized, clearly the product of a sophisticated urban culture. And then around 1800 BC, it was abandoned, and nobody is entirely sure why. The excavations are ongoing, but they exist in an awkward relationship with Bahrain's rapid development. The archaeological site is fenced off, but development presses right up against it. There's a surreal quality to standing in a Bronze Age street with apartment buildings visible just beyond the fence. Dilmun was humanity's original paradise. It's now surrounded by a Bahraini suburb with a KFC 3 minutes away. The gods have a dark sense of humor. 5 Old Idam, Oman. Oman's interior is a landscape of dramatic contrasts. Enormous wadis cutting through limestone plateaus, ancient Fallow irrigation systems still trickling water through channels older than Islam, and scattered across the high mountain ridges, the abandoned villages of a population that has been quietly drifting toward the coast for the last half-century. Old Idam, or Idam al-Qadim, sits in the Hajar Mountains at an elevation that makes every breath feel slightly wrong. The mud brick structures are collapsed in some places and almost intact in others, subject to the randomness of which walls decided to keep standing. What gives Old Idam its particular quality of dread is not what's fallen, it's what's still standing, because the rooms are intact enough that you can tell what they were for. A kitchen, a bedroom, a space for animals on the ground floor, people above, life arranged in specific ways, still readable, just drained of the people who lived it. The abandonment happened in living memory. The 1970s, mostly, when Oman's oil revenues began funding coastal development, roads, hospitals, schools. When Sultan Qaboos modernized the country in what is genuinely one of history's faster national transformations. The mountain villages couldn't compete. People moved. You can't blame them. But the villages they left are extraordinary. And the people who left them are still alive in many cases, living in Muscat or Nizwa, perfectly able to tell you what that kitchen smelled like when someone was cooking in it. Idam isn't old enough to be archaeological and too young to be purely historical. It sits in that uncomfortable middle zone where abandonment hasn't yet become nostalgia. It's still just loss. 4 Umma tell Jokha, Iraq. Umma was a city-state in ancient Sumer. In the 3rd millennium BC, it was a political rival to Lagash. There are surviving cuneiform texts documenting border disputes between them that are 4,000 years old. These are humanity's oldest recorded political arguments. The ruins, known today as Tel Jokha, sit in southern Iraq in Qusayr province. The mound rises from the flat alluvial plain. It contains the compressed remains of thousands of years of continuous habitation, and it has been systematically looted for decades, not quietly, industrially. Satellite imagery shows the site pocked with thousands of illegal excavation pits, a landscape that looks like it's been struck by a meteor shower, except every crater was dug by human hands looking for something to sell. The chaos of the Gulf War, the sanctions era, the 2003 invasion, the subsequent breakdown of institutional order, all of it created conditions in which ancient sites across southern Iraq became fair game. Desperate people, dealers willing to pay cash, a global antiquities market with a long history of not asking too many questions. Cuneiform tablets from Umma ended up in Western museums and private collections. Administrative records, legal documents, economic records, the literal paperwork of one of humanity's first cities, scattered across auction houses in New York and London and Tokyo. What remains at the site itself is genuinely difficult to assess because access is limited and documentation is incomplete. But satellite surveys suggest the damage is catastrophic. A city that survived 4,000 years of history, it may not survive another 50 years of this. Humanity's oldest bureaucracy, tax records, land deeds, trade receipts, torn out of the ground and sold piece by piece to collectors who mostly just wanted something old to look at. 3 Old Marib, Yemen. If the Queen of Sheba existed, and that is a genuinely contested historical question, she would have ruled from Marib. Old Marib was the capital of the ancient Sabaean kingdom, one of the great South Arabian civilizations of antiquity. The Sabaeans built one of the ancient world's most impressive feats of engineering, the Great Dam of Marib. Constructed around the 8th century BC and repeatedly repaired and expanded, it was enormous, a barrier that controlled the waters of Wadi Dana and made the surrounding region into something extraordinary, a genuinely lush and agriculturally productive landscape in the middle of the Arabian Peninsula. Ancient Arab geographers called Marib and its surroundings one of the 4 earthly paradises, a city surrounded by gardens in the middle of one of the planet's driest environments, a civilization built entirely on the engineering of water. Then, around 570 AD, the dam broke. Not for the first time, it had been repaired repeatedly over centuries, but this time it wasn't repaired. Whether due to political collapse, resource exhaustion, or simply the cumulative weight of centuries of maintenance, the dam failed for good. The Sabaean kingdom was already declining. The collapse of the agricultural system it depended on finished it. The ancient texts describe the flood that followed as catastrophic, scattering the Sabaean tribes across the Arabian Peninsula. Some historians believe this dispersal is part of what drove the pre-Islamic Arab migrations that shaped the demographics of the region for centuries afterward. What remains of Old Marib, the ruins of the ancient city, the temple of Al-Makka, the dam itself, are extraordinary. Or they were. Yemen's ongoing conflict has made access to the site essentially impossible, and reports of damage and looting are impossible to verify with any precision. A civilization that built a paradise in the desert, the dam broke, the paradise became desert again, and now even the ruins of the ruins are inaccessible. To Al-Ula, Saudi Arabia. Al-Ula is one of the most archaeologically significant sites in the entire Arabian Peninsula. It sits in a dramatic landscape, red sandstone mountains, a lush palm-filled valley, the remnants of an ancient oasis town that has been continuously inhabited since at least the 2nd millennium BC. It was at various points the capital of the Dadanite kingdom, then the Lehianite kingdom. It was on the Incense Road, the ancient trade route connecting southern Arabia and the Mediterranean. Nabatean caravans passed through it. The Nabatean city of Hegra, just 12 kilometers away, Saudi Arabia's Petra, a city of rock-cut tombs carved directly into sandstone mountains, was part of the same cultural zone. But here's what the Saudi tourism brochures don't put in the headline. In 1983, the Saudi government forcibly relocated the entire population of the historic old town, hundreds of families, removed from houses that in many cases their families had lived in for generations, to allow for archaeological excavation and later tourism development. The old town, a dense labyrinth of mud brick houses, some of them built on even older foundations, was cleared. The residents received compensation and were moved to modern housing nearby. Today, Al-Ula is being aggressively developed as a luxury tourism destination. The Saudi government has invested billions. International architects, high-end resorts, a music festival, a Formula E racing event, all of it orbiting the archaeological heritage that was preserved in part by emptying out the people who had been living with it. The old town sits there now, empty. You can walk through the streets, the doors are open, the houses are hollow. It's beautifully preserved and aggressively marketed, and somewhere in a modern apartment block in New Al-Ula, someone whose grandmother was born in those houses is watching the tourism campaigns run. They didn't abandon this place, they were told to leave, and now it's a tourist attraction. Those are 2 very different things. One, Agdam, Azerbaijan. Agdam was a city of roughly 40,000 people, a functioning, normal, mid-sized Soviet-era city in what is now Azerbaijan. Markets, a stadium, a mosque, apartment blocks, a bread factory. People were born here, people got married here, people were buried here, In 1993, Armenian forces captured Agdam during the First Nagorno-Karabakh War. Every single resident fled, and then systematically and deliberately, the city was demolished. Not bombed, demolished. Looted, stripped, and torn down. A process of intentional destruction that took years and reduced a city of 40,000 people to a field of rubble. The mosque survived. You can see photographs of it from the late 1990s and 2000s, a single minaret rising above a landscape of absolute devastation, miles of ruins in every direction, no other standing structure visible, just the mosque intact, surrounded by destruction so complete it looks like an artist's rendering of the end of the world. Journalists who visited during those years consistently used the same word, Hiroshima. A Hiroshima without a bomb. A city destroyed by human hands piece by piece, on purpose. The international community largely ignored it. The conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh was one of those post-Soviet frozen conflicts that the world's attention kept sliding off of. Agdam sat in its rubble for almost 30 years. In 2020, the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War ended with Azerbaijan recapturing Agdam. The ruins are now back under Azerbaijani control. Reconstruction has been announced. The mosque has been restored. It's been a priority, a symbol. And the rubble is slowly being cleared. But 40,000 people can't unlearn the fact that their city was taken from them and destroyed. And no reconstruction changes what this place represents. That an entire city can be deliberately erased by human beings who decided it was strategically useful to do so. In living memory, in Europe's backyard, while the world was busy watching other things. Agdam is the #1 entry on this list, not because it's the oldest, not because it's the most archaeological, not because it has the most dramatic landscape. It's #1 because it is the most recent, because the people it displaced are still alive, because what happened here was a choice. 40,000 people went to sleep in their city one night. They never came home. That's not history, that's a wound. 10 places, 10 different stories, 10 different reasons why a place that was full of people, full of ordinary human noise, arguments and cooking smells and children and music, became silent. A dam filled up, an army moved through, a trade route shifted, a king made a decision, a government decided a city was more useful as a ruin than as a home. None of these places planned to become ghost towns. None of these people woke up one day and thought, today is the day we leave forever. Abandonment is almost never a decision. It's an accumulation of circumstances until there's no other option. The Middle East gets written about in the Western world almost entirely through the lens of conflict and religion and oil. What gets missed is this, that this is one of the oldest continuously inhabited regions on the planet. That civilization as we understand it was invented here. That these ghost towns aren't exceptions to the story of the Middle East. They are the story. Layers of it, stacked on top of each other going back 12,000 years. If this is your first time here, welcome to Fallow Empire. We cover real places, real stories, no filler. Subscribe, because next time we're going somewhere you've definitely never heard of, and it is going to stay with you. Welcome to Fallow Empire.